to say somebody who knows exactly what they're talking about is a senior industry analyst for CB Insights, Nikhil Krishnan.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me at the end of the day. I know in between everyone in the bar and dinner, which is a very dangerous place to be, but I hope you'll stick with me, and I'll try and make this short and entertaining. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what tech giants are doing in healthcare today. Use this. This data comes from CB Insights. We track everything that's happening in private markets. We have a patent database, earnings calls, et cetera, to help figure out what emerging tech trends are happening and help companies figure out competitive intelligence on who might be threats to their industry. And very quickly about me, I do a lot of our healthcare research. I write our digital health newsletter. So if you're on the newsletter, hello. Now you know I have a face for a newsletter. Just kidding. So I'm going to dive right into it. I don't have a lot of time to talk, so we have full reports on each of the health giants on our research page, which you can see yourself. But on a larger scale, why are tech giants entering healthcare today? They have tried in the past. So if any of you remember Google Health and sort of that kind of catastrophe, and then also drugstore.com way back in the day, this isn't their first rodeo. But why is today going to be different, and why are they focusing on it? Well, for one, they're all competing with each other in more and more spaces. So things like smart homes, advertising, wearables. And this is especially true of AI, which has become essentially a war for talent, as companies are now now the tech giants are acquiring a bunch of different startups, talking about it more, paying very high salaries. And that AI is becoming the underpinning for a lot of the areas that they're trying to compete with each other on. And another reason they're entering it now is because obviously it's a big market. I'm sure you've seen these stats all the time, but the percentage of GDP that healthcare is actually eating into is growing across the board, especially in the United States. But also, the tech infrastructure for healthcare has actually not been totally built out yet, and that creates a new opportunity to build a new tech infrastructure, and being in that layer is actually very sticky and very valuable. And also now there's a new infrastructure can be built out because there's a new data standard at its core. So FHIR, pronounced FHIR, is basically a new data standard that looks a little bit more common to how web standards work. And so all the tech giants are building their new infrastructure using the same data standard, which is going to make it easier to build a platform for third parties to build on top of. So right now, healthcare is lacking a robust consumer-facing platform and third-party development ecosystem. And those are the kinds of things that actually foster innovation and competition. So new data standards are going to be one of the enablers of that. And a few more US-specific trends, but we're also seeing more employers self-insure, so take on the financial risk of their employees. More people are in high-deductible plans, so their wallets are actually very exposed to healthcare, and both of these players are now trying to find more cost-effective and just better, more streamlined solutions. On top of that, I'm sure you've seen this throughout the talks in the last 2 days, but healthcare is becoming more of a data problem, and it's seeing that across a variety of different sources. So we have genomic data now, wearable data. You've sort of seen almost every kind of data at this conference today. So because it's becoming more of a data problem, tech giants sort of have an aptitude here. And then finally, the overhead and the administrative sort of explosion has just basically gone up over time. Healthcare institutions love throwing bodies to solve problems when really new tech infrastructure is what's going to help make these problems a little bit more streamlined. So one advantage they see is the ability to analyze data. But another that tech giants have is sheer scale. So Apple has nearly 90 million iPhone users. Amazon has both businesses and customers that are in a subscription like Prime. And Facebook has more than 1 billion active daily users. So sure, this is obviously important from a leverage standpoint, since almost all of healthcare is negotiating using size. But something actually I think that's more important here is that people actually engage with these products on a very regular basis. So, I mean, how many healthcare apps or products do you use on a regular basis? Maybe this is the wrong audience to ask, but how many do you think the average person uses? So this creates more sort of consumer touch points that tech giants have. And then an underrated advantage that tech giants have is cash. And so obviously having cash is very good in a sector like healthcare, but it's the fact that the cash isn't coming from healthcare that's actually very important. Tech giants can offer their healthcare services for break even or even at a loss as long as it helps Apple sell more products or Amazon sell more Prime subscriptions. So companies that have built their entire businesses only on healthcare as their sole revenue stream and developing competing products with the tech giants are going to find themselves in a very tough spot. And then finally, brand is going to become a bigger deal in healthcare where trust is critical. People like what the tech giants sell. And this is not necessarily the case in healthcare, which is notoriously bad at putting customer experience at the forefront. I actually remember reading a study recently about MRIs and how customers who were supposed to shop for their MRIs because they were in high deductible plans, less than 1% even knew their health insurer had a comparison tool. So they just basically listened to what their physician said, went to get an MRI at the hospital, and it was 6 times the cost of the average MRI because they didn't have a place that they thought they should go to other than the physician to help them make their decision. So that's just one example of where having a bad brand can actually impact your bottom line directly. And so speaking of brands, I'm going to start with what Facebook's deal is in healthcare. And so Facebook's problem is that they don't have a good brand anymore. And so they're a good study on how brand can actually work in both directions. Because when trust starts eroding, it makes it hard for them to launch new products. So for example, it originally was planning to work with hospitals to see if they could connect data from the actual social media platform to health data to help find early indicators of possible mental health disorders, et cetera. But eventually that project got rejected because it turned out the timing wasn't great. They are doing something, so it's launched some digital wellness features on Instagram, and it's exploring whether its AI research in photo stitching and photos as a whole can be used to speed up processes in the imaging field, like MRIs, for example. But it has a lot more potential than that. So already groups are built around specific diseases on Facebook, which make clinical trial recruiting much easier and cheaper. There's a trove of data that on Facebook and Instagram that can be used to assess possible early indicators of mental and behavioral health issues, like I said before. And around the world, WhatsApp is the communication layer of choice. So it can actually build out an ecosystem of health apps the same way that WeChat has done in China if it actually executed correctly. But Facebook obviously has a bunch of other problems on its hands right now. So even though Facebook is sort of more cautiously entering the space, Microsoft is now very seriously starting to enter. So they've learned some lessons from how to do this from past failures, it looks like. So Microsoft's consumer-facing ambitions have sort of been a bit lackluster. They shut down their wearables division, and they originally tried to get into the health data space. But now the company as a whole is totally reorganizing itself around the enterprise opportunity and specifically applications built on top of Azure, their cloud platform. And so you can see here mentions of those in their earnings calls. And this is especially spiked after 2014 when Satya Nadella became CEO. So their cloud strategy is really twofold. So we saw this in Microsoft's recent posts about healthcare. The first is getting healthcare institutions onto the cloud at all. That's just step one. And so Microsoft has an advantage here since they've been specializing on hybrid cloud solutions, and slow steps for companies that want to have some combination of on-premise data and cloud-based capabilities. So with privacy being such a tough issue in healthcare, the hybrid solution can let companies basically go slowly into that bright light, aka the cloud. Microsoft is really focused and spent a lot of time here. Plus, the timing is great because some companies are getting wary of as Amazon enters the sector, so they can actually position Azure against AWS in that way. And then the second part of this cloud-oriented strategy is giving tools and easy-to-build templates that are based on the Azure powered by the Azure platform. So Microsoft wants to put those tools in the hands of respective IT departments and then help them migrate and deploy their own apps. So you can just see some of the blueprints. They have a bunch on their website, which you can check out, but that includes things like chatbots in a box, video conferencing, genomic analysis tools, all powered by the Azure platform. And so they want to put those tools in the hands of people to see how they can build their own applications. But Microsoft obviously has a lot of competition in the cloud space, so namely from Amazon. So Amazon has been getting way more serious in healthcare. Earlier this year, you may have heard they partnered with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway to launch their healthcare division. And then recently, they bought PillPack for about $1 billion. And what they got from that was licenses to distribute in all 50 of the United States, a built-out pharmacy logistic platform, and a company that people actually really like. So one of Big PillPack's main selling points was its NPS scores, and its customers are actually one of the reasons it was able to get through a lawsuit it had with Express Scripts. So a lot of parts of PillPack actually fall pretty in line with Amazon's whole ethos. Obviously, that acquisition did not make Wall Street happy about the prospects for other companies in the pharma supply chain. And to understand areas that Amazon might go to, it's worth understanding how it's approached other areas where it's been successful. So step one, offer a better user experience and get people onto the platform. Step two is heavily invest in the infrastructure and a lot of the high fixed cost parts of the business, warehouses and fulfillment centers or data centers, for example. Then you can effectively outsource the infrastructure to smaller companies, and that makes the back end a lot less messy and more standardized. And then when all of that comes together, Amazon has a very sticky platform. It's very transparent, and it handles distribution well for players that don't want to deal with certain processes, like, for example, running their own servers. And so that playbook can be applied into a ton of areas in healthcare. So just think of all the areas with convoluted supply chains, lots of middlemen, and no standardization. Or what's probably easier is think of areas that aren't like that. So for example, the supply chain is a totally convoluted mess. You have wholesalers, PBMs, PSAOs, and a lot of other acronyms that are just totally thrown in the mix. This is low-hanging fruit for Amazon, and they're obviously already getting into it with the PillPack acquisition. But they have an opportunity to build out a network of pharmacies and even their own retail pharmacies through Whole Foods and start offering pharmacy benefits themselves. And that would disintermediate a lot of the players in the space between the manufacturers and the end customer. But if they were really ambitious, they could actually go the other way too and look at this from the manufacturing side. So in the US, there's a new law called the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, where anyone who is part of the pharma supply chain has to now be a part of a fully interoperable system and be able to trace every unit from start to finish, who touched it, et cetera. So what Amazon could do, they basically already have the front end, and they have a wholesale license. So if they got a manufacturing license, they could handle the labeling, packaging, and basically own the end-to-end pharmacy supply chain, which is great for the manufacturers who don't want to deal with the requirements of this law, and great for the end consumers because there are less middlemen in the process. The medical supply chain and procurement process is not much better. Amazon's For Business division is trying to tackle this area by backwards integrating into the existing process, but it's a tougher sell to crack into hospitals, especially when they don't yet have better prices, and they can't offer everything together because there are parts of the supply chain they don't have built out yet for more sensitive materials, like a cold chain solution, just for example. So instead, it might make more sense to start in an area where their expertise in handling data might be useful. Claims management, which also is a total mess. There are companies that have built massive businesses that are literally just reformatting bills and moving them from one place to another, which is nuts. Considering claims is the glue that effectively holds the healthcare system together, building a modern tech infrastructure here is a necessity and a really valuable place to be. And if Amazon builds a new claim management system, they can power a lot more. So power new marketplaces, for example, like a health benefits marketplace for all those self-insured employers that we were talking about before. And by outsourcing the payment and coordination hassle to Amazon, there's an incentive for both parties to actually join this kind of platform. And we're also seeing startups like Collective Health and Oscar build their own claims management system as the start because they realize how tough it is to build on top of the existing claims management space. If Amazon wanted to double down on the consumer side, another area that would make sense for them is in diet management, specifically for people with specific dietary needs like diabetes or cardiovascular risk. Meal kits are very hard to differentiate space. If you've followed Blue Apron or HelloFresh or any of those companies, you can see just how tough it is to really differentiate yourself and how relatively commoditized the space is. Amazon could actually differentiate its own meal kits by making them more medically tailored. And there are some recent studies to basically show that you can reduce emergency department divisions and acute events because people without access to fresh produce are way more prone to getting related comorbidities. And this is particularly an issue in the dual eligible population. And Alexa is a way that they can actually enable more lifestyle management because it's already in your home. So Amazon position in the home, it's fantastic for that. And now the functionality of Alexa is growing. Now they're adding things like cameras, et cetera. And so we're already seeing a third-party development ecosystem that's built on top of Alexa, and I expect we'll see more once the device itself is actually HIPAA compliant. The real opportunity here is the Medicare Medicaid population, which we talked a little bit about, where touch points in the home are much more important, and Alexa can sort of act as a monitoring tool. The cameras, for example, can do fall detection. You can do nudges for adherence, et cetera. So, Amazon itself has already launched the Alexa Diabetes Challenge, so it sees this as an opportunity itself. There are other Alexa applications that we'd be interested in seeing, especially in the medical record space. How many of you enjoy documenting your visits with your patients, or vice versa? How many patients here like the documentation process? So right now, we're seeing more companies. We've seen 3 or 4 startups raise in the last 4 months alone that are basically creating voice transcription tools for doctors. The technology's not quite there yet. It's not totally perfect, but just the ability to record and transcript information is a very valuable place to be, and Amazon already makes both the hardware and the software for this, and there are a bunch of hospitals that are already experimenting and toying with different HIPAA-compliant Alexa applications, so it has some case studies or partners that it could work with. And then the last place we see Amazon being a potential player is the lab. So many early stage startups, labs, biotech companies have massive upfront costs in the form of equipment, lab space, et cetera. In the tech space, Amazon and other outsourced cloud providers, as a whole, we're able to contribute to the falling cost of starting a new tech company, which is why we've seen this sort of Cambrian explosion of tech startups. So the question is, can Amazon actually do this for the biospace too? One way to do this is through labs in the cloud, which basically run assays and then send back the raw data, so you only pay as you use the equipment. It also has the added benefit of increasing reproducibility since it's basically all encoded. So there are several companies like Transcriptic or Emerald that are doing things like this. Or Amazon could help facilitate more marketplaces to better connect services from CROs or software packages to these companies as they grow. And this would help Amazon capitalize as the companies actually start scaling up. All right, so I have 2 more tech giants and then not a lot of time, so I'm just going to stay with me because Apple and Google have probably made the most headway into the space. Apple in particular sees this as a huge opportunity. The sector apparently rivals the iPhone market, according to Tim Cook. And Apple's entire healthcare strategy centers around having the personal health record on your phone. The health record is going to be where data is ingested and third parties can build on top of, and it tracks everything from wellness to health metrics. And to be more clinically relevant, Apple's actually working with health systems to ingest data directly from providers into the phone, thanks to Fire. It's also working with a startup called Health Gorilla to help ingest lab data as well. Then finally, it can also get data from outside of the hospitals from devices. So it was mentioned a few times today, but yesterday at their event, they announced that there's going to be a mobile ECG, single lead ECG on the new Apple Watch that's coming out, but they also have patents for other biomarkers like sleep apnea or temperature or blood oxygenation through different mediums, like one for headphones, one is through the phone itself, and they're reportedly working on a non-invasive glucose monitor as well, and they have third parties like Dexcom, et cetera, building on top of the platform. So once you actually get the data into one place and into the patient's hands, and then the fun really starts. And obviously by fun, I mean third parties developing on the platform. So Apple's Health Kit and Care Kit let apps do exactly that. ResearchKit has actually been doing this for a while. It's been providing tools to researchers to quickly start an experiment, recruit members, and track what they need. So Apple makes this easy by connecting researchers to a geographically diverse group at a massive scale. It makes the onboarding really easy. And then it uses the phone or the watch as tools, which are already in the hands of participants. So with access to health data on top of this, it really opens a lot of doors for how research can be conducted in the future. And then to round everything out, Apple is also considering building their own health clinics and getting into primary care services. So Apple likes to be vertically integrated wherever it does something, but the question is, how vertical will they go? So if Apple wanted to own the entire first-mile interaction with patients in the health system, primary care would make a lot of sense, but it's definitely more of a services-oriented play that they're not used to. And this would help them capture more value, because right now, Apple seems to be turning the first interaction it has with patients on its head. So right now, a patient feels physically sick, have to figure out what care option they should go to, and then additional data is done to confirm a diagnosis. So when healthy people and patients start wearing medical-grade wearables, we can now catch signs of disease earlier when it's less perceptible, reach out to a patient proactively, and then the relevant data is already in the hands of your clinician thanks to the personal health record. So getting into primary care themselves lets Apple own that entire process. And then finally, last but not least, the artist formerly known as Google, but people still call Google, and its various subsidiaries. So Google's playbook in disease management is pretty straightforward. Find a partner that generates data, or make themselves make a device that generates data. Use this AI expertise to detect diseases earlier or screen for risk in another disease state, and then develop therapies that manage the disease. So I'll give you an example. They've partnered with Optos, who are the makers of the device that takes pictures of the retina. This is the data generation piece. It's been doing a lot of research on whether its algorithms can actually be trained to detect different diseases in the eye. This paper looked at detecting diabetic retinopathy. Another paper looked at whether they could detect cardiovascular risk factors, looking at the blood vessels in the eye. And a more recent paper from DeepMind found that it could accurately detect more than 30 different diseases through OCT scans and then refer patients to the right place based on severity. And what I thought was actually really interesting about this paper in specific is it trained it on less than 15,000 images, when almost all of the other studies that at least I looked at were 70, 90,000 and above. So really small data set they could train on and perform nearly as well as ophthalmologists in a lot of cases. And then finally, so you have the data generation, you have the detection, and then there's the therapeutic. So Verily has been working on an implant that fixes presbyopia, and it's potentially looking at other eye diseases it could fix based on patents like the one you've seen before, so robotic eyes. If you actually look at significant phrases across the patents, you can see that it's been a very hot topic area for them. So that playbook is being replicated across a bunch of different disease states, including diabetes, neurodegenerative disorders, multiple sclerosis, the works. So you can see the case studies in all of these in the full research piece. And then the second angle of the Google strategy is rebuilding the IT infrastructure. And there's a three-pronged approach there, which is creating new pipes in health giants, powering the system through their cloud platform, and then providing third-party researchers with data. So the first is the pipes. So DeepMind in the UK has built a new infrastructure within some of the NHS hospitals that uses Fire to power applications with patient data. The company released its own app to detect acute kidney failure, acute kidney injury, and then alert the right people quickly. But in the blueprint, you can actually see that the end goal is to have third parties develop on top of this ecosystem. They also acquired a company called Apogee, which helps companies basically develop their own APIs and manage their APIs if they want to build tools themselves. It also uses Fire. And the Google Cloud Suite is directed to practitioners, lets you do things like patient engagement, manage files, et cetera. They also have their own open source tools. So Google released their deep variant framework, which helps in genomic analysis. And they have the addition of having their in-house life sciences team, Verily, actually use and develop these tools. So they're coming from their own labs, which is pretty interesting. And then last, they're building their own data sets for third parties to work on top of. So they're working with the NIH on their All of Us project, which tracks all the data from 1 million different participants, which is still in recruiting mode. And they have their own project Baseline, which is tracking 10,000 participants, everything they do from their, data from their wearables, surveys they send out, et cetera. So their whole lives are tracked to basically figure out, to create a massive pool of patient data, both healthy and not healthy. And so now that Google has done all this, what are the next steps for them? So it looks like they're going into an area of actually taking on risk themselves and becoming their own kind of insurer. So they have a job posting for their own health plan executive, and they're an investor in basically every single one of the new health insurance carriers, particularly Oscar, which they've now invested a bunch of money into. And so just to wrap everything up, as you now see all the tech giants and what they're going into, what they're doing, think about, are they going to be a partner for your organization or not? How can you work with them? Are they a threat? We did a poll recently on which tech giants people thought were going to be the most disruptive. People said Google, but since then, Amazon has done a lot of stuff. So yeah, please just think about this, and happy to chat more. Please check out the full research on our research page, and thanks so much.
Nikhil, thank you so much for that. It's what we've been waiting for, actually, to find out where healthcare kind of stands in the spectrum of the big tech giants. So that was fascinating to hear that information that you've collated. You've got a newsletter, haven't you, that people
yes.
can
Yeah, so I run
to.
our healthcare newsletter. It goes to about 60,000 people right now. If you're interested on what's happening in healthcare or the intersection of tech or healthcare or like healthcare-related memes, please join it.
What is it? How do
you can just go to CB Insights Digital Health Newsletter, and it's the first link that pops up. So.
Well done. OK, lovely. Any questions in the final session for today? You can ask Nikhil away. He is a man that's got a big brain full of lots of information. Any questions for Nikhil before we wrap up? Hi, I think there's a microphone coming somewhere.
Great. I think it's over there.
Yes, just at the back. Thank you.
Hi, Nikhil. I follow your newsletter, so I knew a little bit of what you showed today, but very interesting talk. I have two questions. So first is that you talked a lot about how Amazon could disrupt the US healthcare space. Do you have any thoughts on how they, or what they could do in Europe or other economies? And my second question, it's interesting to see how Apple is doing with the research kit. But this is only for the Apple system. So is there something for the Android systems which is similar?
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So for the second question, not yet, although I would guess that Verily or Google as a whole has been watching the success of ResearchKit, so they're not immune to that. And also, I think one of the problems with ResearchKit, which I think you're sort of alluding to, is that it's closed off to only Apple and iPhone users, which is not a very socioeconomically diverse group of people. One of the things that I think is going to change is, especially now that the watch is becoming more of a medical device more than it is just a watch, you'll probably see subsidy programs similar to what they did with the iPhone and carriers way back in the day. It'll look probably very similar with Apple Watches and insurance carriers. So nothing yet on the Android front, although I'm sure that's a very large opportunity. And in terms of working outside of the US, so I know Google, for one, is looking definitely outside the US, largely because the solutions they provide are essentially democratizing the expertise of specialists and putting it into more places. So areas that don't have access, readily available access to clinicians of all types are very low, more eager, I guess, to adopt these kind of solutions where none exist otherwise. So definitely in other countries that have way less sort of access to health services the same way that we have in the US. I think a lot of companies, tech giants aside, a lot of startups are actually working first outside the US to get training data sets or prove their proof of concept before coming to the US, because it's actually way harder to build within the US infrastructure right now. So I'm sure tech giants will see something similar.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Quick question, very quick, and a quick response. Nikhil, is that OK?
Yeah.
Do you have any similar insights on the Chinese tech giants like Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba?
Yeah, so
Very quick if you
Yeah, sure. So I'll just make it very quick. We've written a lot about this, so feel free to take a look. But the private health insurance ecosystem in China is now just totally exploding and becoming way more popular. So initial frictions are just how do you get people signed up for health insurance first? And a lot of the tech giants there are actually figuring out ways to create solutions that lead people into private health insurance plans. So whether that's chatbots, et cetera, a lot more consumer-facing solutions because especially in rural areas, same problem with access as other countries have. And the patient-to-doctor ratio is just so much larger there that you need the demand for finding solutions that can serve patients at scale is just way higher. Plus, privacy and data concerns are obviously way different in China. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Obviously, so much information to gather, particularly as AI and healthcare trying to still work out how it fits really in the wider picture. And this is the man to speak to about the global trends, what's happening, and to kind of help you really. I suppose a kind of book of guidelines, if I can say that, Nikhil. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Nikhil Krishnan, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.